Are we ready? Are we on?
Here. Okay, it's up there,
We're set, okay. Is the recorder on?
yeah. Now it is.
Perfect. Okay. Good evening, everyone. With the posted time having arrived and a quorum of members present, I'll call the Finance Committee for Thursday, October 20th, 2022 to order. Tonight is it's actually session number 3. We didn't get far on session number 1. So session number 3 of our 2023 budget process. And we'll continue where we left off last night. I think Marion's got a PowerPoint to finish.
Yep.
So we'll turn it over to her.
Sure. I want to put my speakers on. Oh,
Is that one on the?
yep, there. Also, today was our bond sale. I don't know, I did include that, and I suppose there's nothing wrong with talking it because it's part of our debt budget. So, when obviously the sale had not taken place when I was putting the budget together, so I was using estimates. So what I'd like to do is revise the budget document so that it reflects now the sale information, and we will have a new, because we only printed enough books for you guys, so we'll reprint books. You can certainly keep those books, but we'll reprint and then tomorrow.
Okay.
And then we'll have some for council and revised ones to give to you guys. There wasn't a lot of difference between, it was more about how much principal we're paying versus interest. We're paying actually more principal than was originally predicted. So it will just, we'll just update for that. But we did have a successful sale. So you have your sale document in your, I handed it out. If you recall, you adopted what's called a parameters resolution, which said as long as the bids met specific thresholds, that we could approve them without your intervention or your final approval. So the winning bid was with Robert W. Baird. Their true interest rate is the 3.85%. Obviously, in putting this together, if you go to like the third page, you can see that they've given us a premium. So they're giving us money up front, extra money that we didn't ask for. And then their interest is higher, and we pay that interest with that premium. And, you know, we have that happen every year. We almost always either have a premium or a discount. So you can see that the bondholder, if they purchase this, is going to get 5%, but because of that premium, we don't pay 5%. And we got 2 bids. Phil said that he was not surprised of the lower interest because of the fact that, you know, the bond market is very skittish right now. And so, you know, there's not as many buyers out there because of interest rates and, you know, people not quite knowing what the market is for bonds at this point. And it does include the credit rating that we got from Moody's, which sustained our AA3. It did indicate, because the Moody's rates our water, sewer separately than the city, because the city's is general obligation debt, so it looks at our taxing power, whereas the water, sewer are paid for by the consumer water and sewer users, and so that debt is got different risks, and you know they have a different financial structure than the city does, and so Moody's is probably going to, in the near future, issue a full rating on those. They were issued a rating last time of AA3, but it's indicating that, you know, there could be a downgrade, particularly based on the heavy debt loads of both the water and the sewer.
Okay. And so part of what we talked about yesterday, though, in connection with the water sewer financial situation was that you had indicated that the PSC doesn't allow them in their financial projections to show the value of the asset while it's still
Right.
in testing and not in service.
Right.
So that really creates an unbalanced equation where they're carrying all of the debt for the facility at, 40 million or whatever
Yeah.
it cost, but there's no asset to offset that debt today.
Right.
And so next year, once the facility is online, we should see a little bit more of a balancing, right?
Correct.
Between, asset and debt versus
Right.
today, where we're basically missing
Yes.
tens of millions of dollars in asset revenue.
Yep.
Okay.
Could you speak to that rating again? So you were talking potentially a downgrade in the future for future
For water and
obligation?
sewer. So the Moody's can rate you at any time. You obviously ask for a rating when you're issuing debt, but really Moody's has the authority, I guess, to rate you at any time. So they can come in one day and say, hey, we want to give you a new rating. And obviously, they monitor the city, as not just the city of Wausau, but all communities, because, for example, this summer, I got a call from them, hey, we're reading a lot about your PFAS problem, what are you guys doing about it, and how are you going to manage that? So, again, Moody's sole purpose in life is to help bond investors make good decisions on the quality of debt that they're purchasing. So,
So a rough idea, what does that equate to if we lose 1 point or one?
I couldn't really tell you that. Yeah, I can ask Phil, and he might be able to tell us that. In my 20-plus years of working here, people have always told us that we have gotten good ratings because, for whatever reason, the city of Wausau name is attractive to investors, and I was always told it was because of Wausau Insurance. But I don't, know if that still holds true.
They've been gone a long time, so
Right.
we're kind of on our own. But
Yeah, well, I don't know the ratings history, but weren't we AAA once before?
No, we were never AAA.
Never. Okay.
We were AA2 at one time. So it used to be they didn't have the 1, 2, 3 when I first came into government. You had A or AAA, AA, and then down.
Okay.
And we were and then they came out with the numbering, and we were AA2 when the numbering came out, and then they downgraded us to AA3.
2017 or 19 or something?
Yeah, something like
Yeah,
that.
okay.
When we started issuing the debt for the TIDs that were getting ready to close.
Okay.
So they got nervous about the TID districts, basically.
All right.
Okay, so with that, I guess at a future meeting too, with the announcement of the sale, will we have Phil probably
Yep.
on
I can have them
conference call or
Yeah,
have
for
him
next
stop up?
Tuesday.
Yeah, because, and I think he always presents to the council too, right? The
Oh.
results of the debt sale?
Sure.
Doesn't, and
Yeah,
he
so we
maybe,
can-
if we have this here today, maybe we can just have him do the council.
Okay.
Because there's,
I'll see if he's
you know,
available.
we will have already seen this,
Yep.
but they won't. And
Yep.
he used to give the same spiel twice in one day,
Sure.
which we could save him the earlier presentation if he wants to just do council.
Okay.
But that would be helpful if we could have him come.
Okay. And he can tell you then too about the rating difference. I think how the investors feel about different things, for example, bank qualified. This year we're bank qualified. That means we've issued under 10 million of general obligation debt, and banks that hold our debt get certain tax preferences if it's bank qualified. That's why they call it bank qualified. It means it's basically tax-free to the banks if they hold it in their portfolio. There's been years where that has been a huge benefit if you can issue bank qualified debt. And then other years, it doesn't really help that much. And it's all, again, about what investors are looking for. So I will definitely ask them that.
Is it
And we-
market driven? So when you see
Yeah,
like
it's very
volatility,
yes.
it flows with the
Yeah,
volatility?
yes.
And when things kind of calm down,
Right.
it's less relevant?
Yeah, and what banks are doing. For example, with the bank qualified, how many banks are out there looking to grow their asset portfolio versus, if they're giving out a lot of loans, maybe they're not investing as much, and so maybe it doesn't become as big of a benefit because the banks aren't going to hold these because they've more.
But generally speaking, it's this to the city's advantage to reverse that trend and
Oh,
try
for
to
sure.
get an improved
Absolutely.
rating so
Yep.
that the trend doesn't keep going.
Yeah.
So what we
Okay,
were
we'll count
talking
that.
about last night as an option that we wanted to survey a little further in our workshops is that when we had talked about maybe some level of forgiveness on the utilities pilot payment
Yep.
to improve the health of the utility,
Yep.
that then also, with the plant coming online, could level out some of the rating for the utility
Yep.
for next time.
Yep.
So I think that's something important for us to think about if we decide we want to do that forgiveness. And then, if we also then approve the ARPA request we got yesterday for their capital projects, that then mitigates some of their borrowing.
Yep.
We could really infuse some positives into the utilities situation that they're in right now, right? So,
Yep.
okay.
So when we look at the budget influences for the 2023 budget, obviously we had a 9.5% increase in health insurance. Our salary schedules for non-represented employees were lifted by a 3% COLA. We've got the union contracts under negotiation and the transit that was settled. If you recall, Tony changed how individuals progress through our step system. And so if you're below midpoint, you actually get 2 steps per year until you reach midpoint. And then we also saw an increase in the Wisconsin retirement rate pretty much across the board this year. The general went up 0.3%, fire went up 1.14%, police went up 1.64%. And this is all, I'm just speaking of the employer. So, those things obviously are all adding to our personnel costs. From a non-personnel basis, CCITC, we have been for years at 21% of their budget. And there is an actual formula that has been adopted by all 3 entities, meaning the city, the county, and the healthcare center. And it looks at workloads, so they're looking at the time that they're spending is one of the driving factors, but they average it out over a certain number of years so that there's smoothing in case of just, a 1-year anomaly or whatever. So that obviously impacted, because we're picking up, 4% more of their budget than we have in prior years. And then also, there were pretty significant increases in the maintenance costs due to, all of the software upgrades that we've gone. Anytime we get new software, obviously, those maintenance costs are generally higher. We also have built-in utility increases because WPS has, alerted us that they are looking at a 9.5% increase, as well as just all other general inflationary impacts. And then finally, at the last meeting, we talked about increasing motor pool charges. And we had said we were going to try, I had shown that we should increase by 18% next year if we were going to try to, recover all of our costs or get online as much as possible, but we talked about smoothing. So I settled on 12% in the budget only because I felt like that was affordable and, we can again look at increases next year too. So from a property valuation standpoint, our equalized value did go up by 12.73%, which is about what the counties went up overall. So it's not like we're taking a huge extra piece of the pie. And right now, we don't have our assessed valuation. When the schools, the county, and the technical college talk about their tax rate, they are always using the equalized value, which is basically fair market value. So what happens is the state asks for sales data from all local assessors and compares the sales data to what the assessor has that property valued at. And then it determines how far off of market they are. And it basically applies that study to all properties within that community. So it's really, the state is not valuing on a parcel by parcel basis, they're valuing the entire community. The assessor is the person who values parcel by parcel, except for with manufacturing, and that the state values. So we don't have our assessed valuation yet. Like I said, at yesterday's meeting, we would expect to get that anytime soon now. Usually it comes, probably next week or the week after. I have a conservative estimate of 0.7% increase. Again, it's not a market increase, so that 12%, obviously, we know housing was high last year. But we had still a strong net new construction. Our net new construction was 2%, over 2%. And so I feel like my 0.7 is very conservative, but we'll see shortly.
How does this reconcile with what then Rick's going to have to do? Is there going to have to be a revaluation at some point when we get below the 0.9 on the?
He will, yes.
Do you know what we're currently at?
No. They'll tell us what our assessment ratio is when we get our full roll from them.
But we're potentially low.
Rick, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, and then I just have a little bubble here to note why we had that negative dip in 2019, and that is when the state removed off of all commercial properties, machinery and tools. And so it basically was exempting certain properties, and that caused that dip. So it wasn't that we actually lost value, we lost assets that were being valued. So we were just talking about our net new construction figures. The state is the one that determines this based, again, on information that the city assessor provides to the state of Wisconsin, and then applying equalized value ratios to it. So you can see that we've enjoyed some pretty nice growth over the last 5 years, and that growth continued this year. Net new construction is an important number for us because it's used in the state of Wisconsin's levy limit calculation and their expenditure restraint. So we like to see a good, healthy increase in our net new construction.
Is that calculated in the year that a structure is built or in the year that it begins paying tax? Like in a year, say we have growth, like we build a manufacturing facility and it starts to pay tax the year after it
Right.
opens the
I
door.
think the net new construction would be the net new construction that took place in let's see. It would have been constructed as of 1/1/2022.
Okay, so projects
Last
that
year.
were probably in progress and not necessarily previously completed, but
Correct.
still underway. Okay,
Yep.
thanks.
So when we look at our levy, we have two components to our levy, our general operating levy and then the tax increment. And we keep those in separate buckets. And generally not generally, the tax increment is a formula. So it looks at your current levy and it compares your equalized value with the districts in and without the districts in, and it applies a percentage based on that calculation of TID in and TID out. And so it's not a number that you can control. It is what it is based on that math. So I will add that the higher our levy goes, the more increment we make, or the more increment is generated, because our tax rate is higher then. But the amount of levy that we're using for operations went up in this proposed budget from $28,556,000 to $29,878,000, which is a $1.3 million increase. And then the increment went up $284 for a total of $1,606. So again, overall, that would be a 4.89% increase from the prior year.
And that's pretty much reflective of growth. More people or new people paying into the system and not necessarily a change in taxation on the people who've
Right.
always been here.
Right.
Okay.
And as far as utilization of levy dollars. Oh, hold on there. That is an old slide. My bad. I had 2 slides that were the same and I deleted the wrong one. So let's just pass on that one slide, sorry. So when we look at our assessed tax rate, to Lisa's point, the increase in the assessed tax rate is 42 cents. So if you had a $100,000 house, that would be $42. When we look at an equalized value, our tax rate actually went down. So we're not passing on the growth to our constituents. We're passing on a portion of that growth because obviously, we didn't pass on the whole 12% growth. When we start the budget, the one nice thing is we're starting at a very strong point. When we look at our fund balance, you can see that we have had steady growth the last few years. We are now at $15.6 million, which is very healthy, with 11.4 of that basically unrestricted. And the others are either committed or non-spendable. So this is why we are always kind of monitoring what the advances to the tax increment districts, because that would be in that top purple component, and they wouldn't want that to be too high because it limits the amount of fund balance that's available to you. Am I skipping slides?
You skipped a couple.
Did I?
The levy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The levy changes.
It
the
looked
levy
like it
limit.
did. Okay, hold on.
Yep, those two are.
I
They were
gotta
right
get-
after the pie chart.
I gotta get them here. I wonder if I still had them. I had hid some from yesterday when I was only showing you part of the slide, part of the thing.
We're at slide 8.
Oh,
You skipped that.
how did I do that? Okay, sorry. There. Okay, here's the levy changes by fund. So you can see that the general fund uses the largest component of our levy dollars, with almost $1 million extra going to the general fund. Again, a big portion of that would be in personnel costs. I would say the 2 largest parts would be motor pool and personnel costs. The recycling fund is using about $35,000. Our contract with Harder's goes up 2% per year. That's the inflation rate that we have with that contract. And then any new housing, but in addition to the Harder's contract in the recycling fund is leaf pickup and the yard waste site. So that's where we're seeing the majority of the cost increases. Community development is at $325 this year. It was at $279 last year, about $46,000 increase. That is the funding of those positions that are not funded through the community development block grant, so that all of the planning staff and a component of the community development staff, like the ED person. The central purchasing, that we left the same. We really didn't get much advancement in setting aside additional dollars for capital purchase. Central purchasing stayed the same, and you can see that the capital projects was actually a reduction. Now, last year, we were able to bump up our capital projects levy because, if you recall, Greg applied a huge portion of what he used to rely on levy to his CARES funding entitlement that he got. So he applied quite a bit of his CARES money last year, and then the plan was to step that back down. So we will have a little bit more money left to apply in the 2024 budget, and then he'll be done with his CARES. He also has sort of capital allocations too, but those are set aside for capital, and this is, we're talking about operations. So you can then see almost an exact opposite take place in the Metro ride that follows, where his levy is going up by 500,000, and there again, it's just moving those dollars to offset his loss of CARES. Yep. The debt service fund is going up $75,000. I think last year in my budget, I had predicted it would actually go up a little bit more than that. Again, we have now the full load of the fire station, and I do predict it will go up another 50,000, I think, next year, and then it should level out. Parking fund, we need to do, when I look at our problem areas, parking is a problem area. It is relying more and more on levy, and, you know, I've been talking to the police department and engineering that perhaps we should do another parking study. You know, our last study recommended that we give one free ticket away per year for people who are violating, let's say, overtime parking in the downtown. But that's 50% of the tickets that we give. So we are seeing, we've seen a big decline in our parking ticket revenue. And I think COVID has had a big impact on parking as well, because you know, we just don't have as many office buildings fully staffed. A lot of people are working from home, and so the revenues are down. And while we've enjoyed some savings because of the LED projects we did, it's, you know, there's a lot to maintaining the ramps.
Here's a thought on this. Like, whenever we worked on parking, when we went to the new parking system and we tried to figure out parking rates, the first people that come to talk to us about parking, and they either want changes to make it cheaper or more user-friendly, or certainly not increase, is our business sector downtown, because they want downtown to be super consumer-friendly, because most of them don't have parking lots, and they need those spaces to cycle out quickly, so people with quick service stuff, like to pick up packages and food, can get in and get out. And so part of the advocacy for making that first ticket a warning was that they didn't want parking citations for over parking and excessive parking to be a turnoff for people to like come downtown and shop. But that does now have negative pressure on our budget, because we're eating all of that basically. I mean, we're user friendly, but there's no way to recover that investment. So I think that's an important discussion that we have, you know, and I don't know, you know, what the magic formula is to recover some of that. But, you know, I think that it's important for the stakeholders in that district that are gaining the benefit of that parking friendliness. There is not a lot of skin in the game for those folks. You know, there's no contribution from our bid district. There's no contribution from, you know, and I get that they're struggling already. I mean, they're stretched about as thin as they can be. But, you know, as things start to recover in better times, maybe we need to have a discussion about where our revenue sources are, because our parking ramp revenue is way down. Work from home has taken a ton of our workforce that comes downtown to park every day that we're buying monthly passes. So, I mean, just the makeup of where we make our money is so different than it was in 2019.
Right.
Right, so-
Oh, go ahead.
When was the last time, or has the parking fund supported itself ever without
Yeah, I've got a
kick from the
slide.
levy?
I got a slide coming up, so you
Okay.
can see.
Excellent.
In there. I think the other thing we were talking about internally is, you know, right now we have a graduated ticket system too, where the first ticket I think is $10, and then you get, like, the first one free, and this is just for the downtown violations. You get the first one free, the second and third one are $10, and then it, you know, you get some graduation, and we were thinking maybe the graduation should come sooner versus later as a way to, you know, I guess try to make up for that one free ticket. And, you know, if you go to Milwaukee and Appleton, they're like $25 or $30 tickets right
Well,
straight
no, and you
away.
pay $3 or $4 an hour to park in some of their
Yeah.
ramps. I mean, Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if we're to the point yet for another parking study, but I think we need to look at what other communities do. I remember, you know, one of the reasons why we went with the one free ticket was because we were rolling over the new parking system with no same block reparking.
Right.
And also the passport system. And this was two big new things for people to kind of comprehend, and we didn't want to alienate out-of-towners right away. But this is 2-3 years down the road, and maybe that's the time, maybe we need to look at what other communities are doing, especially those that are on the automated parking systems.
Right.
And it's, instead of a $20 parking ticket, it's a $5 parking ticket instead of the warning, and then step up 10, 15, 20 to curb the habitual parkers.
Yeah, we'll do a survey and bring that back to the committee.
Okay,
Yeah.
good deal.
The airport went up about 56,000. There was a renegotiation of the airport contract, that is part of that, and then, just general operations. Animal control is remaining the same. And then, again, kind of going through, you can see that the general levy went up about 4.63%. And I'd mentioned yesterday that, I'd surveyed about 15 communities, and that was the average. So I figured that was, where.
So just a quick question on animal control, because we earmark our
Yep.
animal license fees and our animal fine revenue to animal control fund, because that's an enterprise fund. Do we know where we are at least this last year with animal licensing compliance? For a while, when we started out, it was terrible.
Yeah.
And then it got way, way better, because the enforcement and the follow-up was better. And then it was starting to drop off again, because I think we had pulled back on the follow-up a little bit, because we didn't have the staff time available to do it. But, are we still in a position, and we raised the license fee, that gave us some relief. But I think that's something we should keep an eye on as far as license revenue, because if licensing compliance is going down, that's something we got to watch. Because when we first went to online licensing, things got better as well. We took that in-house and whatever. So, if we find that we're sliding backwards, that means that we're either not doing the follow-up or the enforcement, or that people are, ignoring the requirement to license those pets. And for a while, we were at like 10% compliance when we first started our animal efforts. And then we had improved, we were something like 80%. And then, we started to go backwards. So it would be interesting to know
Yeah,
where
I'll take a look at that and bring that back.
where that falls.
Tuesday.
Yep.
Because I do remember this spring, I thought were doing some pretty big enforcement initiatives, but
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not
Once they're
100%,
officially
but-
late, like April, I think
Right.
that's when we were doing a big push to,
Yeah.
get them in and get them taken care of. So Doug?
Yeah, question, and I don't know if it falls into one of these levy buckets or not, could you speak to the Housing Stock Improvement Fund? Where does
Sure.
that go?
So that is non-levy. That basically, if you recall, when TID 2 terminated, or was it TID 5?
It was both, I think, but 2 was the mall. I think that's where we started from.
So anyhow, when, in the TID law, you can take one last year of increment and use it for affordable housing. So that was the fund that was created to accumulate the dollars from that and then to regenerate it. So it's basically was turned into a revolving loan fund, and as money comes back in, it's re-loaned out. In addition, we also use that fund to manage our lead replacement grants that we get from the GNR.
All right.
So those are the two main activities, or the two activities that take place there. But
Okay.
it receives no levy dollars.
Okay, so it could receive some of that final year TID,
Yes, in the next.
At some point.
Next time, yep.
okay.
So, as I mentioned, the levy limit is restrictive to just net new construction. So our levy via that net new construction could increase by 592,000. We've proposed a 1.3 million. That law says that you can borrow up to your debt. So we're using each year some of our debt exemption. And each year when we use some, we're using more of that debt exemption. So we are using 3 million of our debt exemption and kind of a history of the debt exemption and what we've used.
Yes, you did.
Yes, I did already, our tax rate, and I did that.
Yep.
So if we look at our general fund revenues, obviously the general fund is where most of our activity takes place. You can see that we rely heavily on property taxes, followed by our intergovernmental grants. Those are our two major revenue sources. Others are license and permits, fines, forfeitures, public charges, intergovernmental charges for services, and other financing sources. Those other financing sources, that 5%, that is where we're getting our tax equivalent from the water utility. We get a $400-some thousand transfer from the sewer utility, and we enjoy about $147,000 of room tax every year. And that $147,000 that we transfer in is really to offset the efforts that some of the departments are putting into event planning and the costs associated with that. Looking at kind of the change, you can see that, from a revenue standpoint, we did have a pretty strong improvement in our revenues, including property taxes, intergovernmental grants and aids. We saw a pretty big increase in expenditure restraint this year. Unfortunately, we also saw a decrease in transportation aids, so those two kind of offset themselves. License and permits went down a little bit. Fines and forfeitures up. Public charges, we are predicting to go up. That is mainly in the area of EMS and the Parks Department are the two areas. We did a survey. We have not increased our EMS charges in quite a few years now. And so our third-party billing is actually recommending that we increase our EMS charges. Miscellaneous revenues would be generally interest income, because we are seeing an increase in interest income. And then other financing sources includes the transfers from the utilities, but it also includes billings to other departments.
So let's just say going forward that we want to continue our discussion about forgiveness of some of the
Yep.
pilot payment. We should probably then, at least in pencil, subtract
So this,
that amount from this, right?
right,
So-
if you said you wanted to keep the rate the same as last year, you wouldn't have to deduct anything from the budget, because the budget doesn't assume an increase. So
Oh, okay.
So
the-
we would have been able to charge 2 million, and that, 2 million to the water
Sure.
and the 400-some thousand to the sewer. But you can see that I didn't increase that. It's other financing sources that went up,
Okay, so,
not the transfers.
okay, perfect.
Yep. And here kind of is a long history of our major state aids. So you can see we lost like $300 of shared revenue, but our expenditure restraint went up pretty sizable. And then you can see we saw a small decrease in our transportation aids. One of the reasons expenditure restraint went up is because if a community does a referendum to exceed their levy limits, they exceed their expenditure restraint as well, they basically have to take a year off of expenditure restraint, and they don't get that money. The pot stays the same, and they divvy it up amongst all of the communities that do qualify.
Oh,
So that is
okay.
one of the reasons why ours went up, is because there were a number of communities that had referendums and now didn't get expenditure restraint in
Okay,
that
so
year.
we're sharing in some of what they had.
Right, and for some communities, it's not a big deal. So like Brookfield did a referendum, they only get a couple $100,000 of expenditure restraint a year, so for them to take a year off, it's not that big of a deal. But for us, it would be a big deal to take a year off of expenditure restraint. So, when we finance directors meet with the league representatives, and I said, I think one of their agenda items should be, if you have passed a referendum, that referendum should hold for the expenditure restraint too, and you should be, basically, you should be safe harbored from the expenditure restraint calculations, as well as the levy limit.
So that referendum would be something we would do, and wouldn't include the school district or
Right, it
county
would be
type
our
thing?
own referendum,
Okay.
right. And a lot of communities are doing that to exceed their levy limits because they want to add new firefighters, or they want
So it's a
something.
bad strategy if you don't plan ahead.
Right. And that's kind of a good segue, because I think, it's going to be important that we maximize our levy limit as we see these higher inflationary dollars, because we want our base to be built as high as possible so that we can absorb those firefighters when the time comes without any big problem. The one thing I would say is, and that's why I've talked about the timing of closure of the TIDs, because expenditure restraint also gives you a bump when you close a TID. So you get half of that value to add to your calculation, half of your TID value of the increment. So to me, it's going to be really important that we schedule a closing of a TID when those positions come on the levy. So again, we could increase our general fund expenditures 9%, which is about $3,029,000. We currently have increased it 2.9 million. So we have a little bit of wiggle room yet, 128,000 that we haven't used of that levy increase. So expenditures by activity, again, you can see that Public Works, Police, and Fire are the big ones, followed by General Government, Parks.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
So if we've only got 128 under, so what happens so does that limit our ability to do a budget amendment next year at some point if it
So if,
surpasses that?
yeah, so it's basically once you adopt your budget, it's really the adoption where they look at that. So we'll send a report in at the end of or the beginning of December, once the budget is adopted, that says this is what our adopted expenses are. So just a little bit about the expenditures by activity. When we look at how those break down as far as categories, again, you can see 71% of that is our personnel costs, followed by 23% for contractual services, and the rest are pretty small little pieces of the pie. It really is indicative that we are a service entity. We're providing services, and that's why, personnel. And
Well, it is,
contractual
and I think as we work in concert with the HR committee, which we've been doing for the last year, to figure out ways to be an attractive place to work, where we've worked on recruitment and retention, and we've created some incentives, and we've, moved up the pay scales, and we've removed the bottom rung for some of them, and now we're in, negotiation on 3 contracts. All of that puts upward pressure on the 71%. So, and the economy is not helping that. When somebody goes to the store and they're, 2 bags of groceries are $150, there's expectations within the workforce that, your employer might make things better. So I think we have interesting conversations to have along the way here through this process, but, you can see how much of that is already eaten up.
And then if we look at, well, what are we spending our money in the contractual services bucket? Again, a lot of it is we're charging ourselves. So 71% of our contractual services line item is motor pool. So, again, police is paying a big portion of the motor pool budget. Fire is paying a big portion, and Public Works, because of all of the truck activity, everything that they do relies on vehicles. So it's really going from one pocket to the other pocket as far as that component of the budget. And then, again, if we look at that contractual services, our refuse collection contract, that is about 13%. And then CCITC, like I said, we're now paying a little bit more of that contract as well as the maintenance agreements. Our EMS billing service is about 2.4 million, and then basic repairs and maintenance. And a little bit of private snow removal. Oh, and utilities, I didn't cover utilities. Kind of looking at our staffing, it's, very, it correlates well to the expenses, obviously. Police and fire are the big, again, FTEs, followed by public works.
One more time, I'm
Yeah.
sorry for the dumb questions here.
No,
This are these calculations based on budget, on full,
yes.
full
this is their
employment or-
FTEs, yeah. the
Okay, so there's-
Authorized FTEs.
okay, so we're not accounting for any potential overtime or look back on any
Well,
overtime?
we budget for overtime, but you don't add that to the number of FTEs. Like you count how
Okay,
many
get it.
people are full-time employees.
But I mean, as a function of
Right.
reducing costs, if there's an inordinate amount of overtime in one of these buckets,
Right.
some of the new hiring we're going to do hopefully softens that.
Right, and I think I think you're asking great questions, Doug, because as we get those new fire employees, it will be interesting to see what happens to overtime and whether you would expect that overtime will go down. So will we have to pick up 100% of the new positions, those 12 positions? One would hope not, because one would hope that there would be less overtime as a result of that. So just kind of outlining where we are in our hiring, there's been 13 new positions kind of outside the budget process. The police community outreach specialist, which is being funded by ARPA, that levy funding is through 2024, because if you remember, ARPA, you have to have your funds obligated by 2024. I haven't seen anything that shows just because you have an employee, you don't have to have it actually spent until 2026. But I don't know unless you would write some sort of employment contract that guaranteed that person 2 years of employment. Could you use ARPA beyond the 2024? I don't really know. I haven't done much research on that, so we can assume, at least today, that they're going to have to be levy funded 1/1 of 2025. 3 firefighters through ARPA, they again would have to be funded by 1/1 of 2025. And then 9 firefighters through the SAFER, and they would be coming on board the following year, 1/1/26.
So does any of the schedule get kicked out if they don't have the positions filled on time?
I
I mean, I worry a little bit about the Safer Grant, because if they have funding for 9,
And they can't
what if they
retain-
only find 6 or 7,
Yeah.
And so is there a return, or is there an extension that gives them,
Yeah.
is there a window where they can hire them, because they've had such a hard time? All fire departments are having
Yeah.
a hard time.
I don't
finding
know
the right
answer
people.
to that.
Okay,
I'll have to see if Bob does.
okay.
Are we loading one over the other right now, like the SAFER guy? If we hire a person, is he designated
Oh.
a SAFER or the ARPA, or do we take the most advantageous? Maybe,
yeah,
I guess
I don't
that's,
know.
maybe that's not the right
That's
way
a
to
good-
phrase that question,
That is
but
a good,
there might be a priority
Right.
on one.
yes.
Right, it depends on, too, I think, when the money arrives. So, if we don't have the Safer money yet, and we have the ARPA, and they hire somebody like right now, I think we have to use the money that's here,
Yeah.
right? So,
I can tell you too, next Tuesday on your agenda is a grant for the police department to add 1 police officer, because they received notification from Beat Patrol that they qualified for a grant. Obviously, again, that would be a short-term, a short term of funding. It's multiple years. I think it's typically 3 years.
Yeah.
And then that funding goes away. And, Ben's like, oh, what do you think? And I said, well, we have all these other positions that are going to come onto the levy at the same time. And I said, I wonder if, could you, 'cause, given the transient nature of workforce today, particularly in law enforcement, could you have that, like FTE be almost like a LTE FTE, where when vacancies happen, you have to, like
Bring that person into your core team.
Yes.
Yes.
And decide whether at any time there's a vacancy, it gives you an opportunity to reduce that workforce back down.
Okay,
That-
so that's, that's working within the union contract?
Well, that's
Yes.
right, assuming their contract allows us to even offer an LTE, because they,
Well, the person wouldn't be an LTE position. You would just be looking at every vacancy and saying, do we want to fill this because this grant is ending? That person who's working the grant is different than,
right, and so you would expire the grant through attrition and not
Yes,
necessarily dismiss
exactly.
whoever's in the spot.
Makes sense.
right.
Yeah, that makes some sense to look at it that way, because I think we'd be in conflict with the contract if we tried to
Right.
offer LTEs that were not civilians.
And so you could say 12 months prior to that grant being expired, you have to bring each hiring back to HR or something for,
Well, some type of continuation.
Yes.
Right, so that we could
Yeah.
evaluate first the impact, like, is that position still filling a need? Like, has whatever they've been addressing improved to the point where, the impact is different, or maybe the needs are different? I think it's important to have that talk.
right. Because then you're not really having to let someone go or create any of that. It's really just through that attrition that you're recovering that grant position and not having to fund it if you can't afford it.
Well, and even within different work assignments that they offer, I mean, there's so many specialty areas that they allow people to work in, and, say you have, like a preponderance of people that had it in 1 year, were doing, community resource or whatever, and, maybe if the impact there is such that you need those, 1 or 2 of those people to do something different for a while, because you've gained enough ground in
Right.
one area, those are important conversations for us to have with them, for like where they feel the needs are in the community too, for that spread.
So when we look at changes in the actual department budgets from current year to next year, there are a few that stick out. Again, obviously CCITC, you can see a 40% increase. Again, our share of CCITC went up, and they've got more of those maintenance related costs. And then with some of the smaller departments, both assessment and human resources, we had to adjust health insurance. Obviously, we have a vacancy of the director right now. We now in the budget have a family plan in versus a single plan, as well as we looked at some past hiring of directors recently and felt like we needed to adjust that to accommodate a potential new hire. So, we might be able to, before the budget is actually adopted, adjust that to actual. I know interviews are next week, I believe, on that position. So we might have more information in that area. And then again, departments that had young staff that are moving up 2 steps are seeing higher increases in their personnel costs. So their personnel costs, are going up faster than, let's say, a department who has a lot of seasoned, who are only taking 1 step. And if you remember, once you're past midpoint, you're only getting 1.5% increase a year, basically a 1.5% increase. Whereas when you're in the bottom half, you're getting a 3%, and then you're getting that twice in a year. So that's, a total lift of 6%. Yeah. It kind of shakes out. And of course, police, fire, and public works also have absorbed that 12% increase in motor pool. Now, it didn't increase the budget, like you, if you looked at their motor pool line item, I didn't increase that specifically 12% because some people weren't using their entire motor pool budget to begin with. So what I did was I did a 5-year estimate and a 3-year estimate of actuals and then looked at what I thought it should be to recover that 12%. So that's how I calculated the 12% increase. So what does this kind of look like overall in the general fund? We've got $40 million worth of expenses. Our non-levy revenues are the 18 million, and then the levy of 22 million. So, you know, we've been generating about $1 million worth of profit a year the last few years. And a big part of that is these vacancies that, you know, we used to have virtually no turnover in staff. We now have, you know, are maintaining or multiple turnovers. And so, you know, one thought process is to set aside and have basically 3 positions that we would not fund. And we're not targeting one specific department. Everybody has their full salary and fringe benefits, like they would be fully funded. We're just not going to levy for that. So
So you'd
that
assume at any given time that 3 positions somewhere
are on,
are unfilled.
yes,
Statistically, that seems reasonable. In fact,
Yes.
our reality is probably way more
right.
than that, so.
Yeah, and when, at my last finance meeting with the league, I asked the question of unfunded vacancies, and I think it is very common now for people to, you know, include this. I was listening to Lance's, budget presentation at the county online. He has a component for unfunded position, or not unfunded, but he does not fund all of his positions for a vacancy rate too.
Well, it makes sense. You know, a number of years ago, we talked about budgeting for vacancy, and that was at a time when we were fully staffed and that there was still staffing needs in the departments where they were fully staffed, but they still didn't have enough people to like get all their work done and mitigate their overtime. And so at that point, when we talked about budgeting for vacancy, that would have forced those people into a situation where when they found the right people, they had to come hand in hand every single time they needed to make a hire. And so we decided at that point it didn't make any sense, but now, given the fact that we have so much volatility in the job market, it really makes a lot of sense to do that.
Wait,
Go ahead.
so how do you account that back to each department? So if one department is always full and another is, say, taking up that vacancy, did they lose their budget?
No, we don't allocate it back to the departments. We just don't have a revenue source to fund 3 positions. So no one's gonna look bad if they maintain full staff all year. They have their full, staff budget in their department's budget, and this is like a missing revenue source.
So if we pick up $1 million because we're short in one department, that you don't come take it back from.
No,
Okay.
no.
No, but and in a perfect world, let's say some miracle happened where everybody was at full staff the entire year, we would have to then go back and balance our budget to find the 300.
Right.
You know, because by the end of the year, and it wouldn't happen immediately, but you'd probably get to September and be like, whoo, we got to find some money. Right,
And there
so-
are, you know, like oftentimes other line items that have savings too. Obviously, you know, if we have a light
Right.
winter, we always have savings in
Right.
other areas and, you know,
Sure,
there's always
surplus,
unspent-
contingency,
Right.
there's all kinds, so,
Yeah.
okay.
So when we look at our special revenue funds, these are funds generally that have another revenue source, and it's usually grant-related. Community development obviously is a big grant department. Again, the tax levy is $325,000. Their expenditures are $1,048,000. The economic development fund, this is a small fund that we've maintained. The fund actually used to be to kind of manage expenses that we would encounter out in the business campus. But we do have a reserve in that fund from when the mall refinanced. If you recall, when the mall refinanced, we got a portion of their proceeds. We gave half of that back to the mall, and then we retained it. We have allocated out for things over the years, but that's sitting in that fund. The environmental cleanup fund, this is basically the Holtz-Krause fund. Years ago, we were getting annual payments from the insurance when we were named a related party in Holtz-Krause. When it was turned into the soccer fields, our obligation of setting that money aside just for Holtz-Krause was eliminated. And so we have been using this as just an environmental cleanup fund now. So we've been calling upon this fund to help us with Cleveland Avenue and Riverside Park. Those are the two main ones. But the thing I'd like to point out is, you know, there's no new revenues coming in. I mean, this 54,000, we get the bills for the Superfund site by the water utility, and based on that EAP settlement, we are like 1/3 of the costs, and we divide up the other 2/3, 1/3 to Wausau Chemical and 1/3 to Marathon Electric. And so we bill them. If we get a bill from the EPA or from our environmental engineer, we pay that bill, and then we bill them the other third. So that's what those revenues are. Hazmat is a grant. We already talked about the housing stock improvement. Room tax fund, again, is where all of our room tax goes. Public access, recycling, kind of talked about those. As you can see, so as far as presentation on the ARPA fund, in this budget, we have not allocated new ARPA. When council adopts the resolution allocating ARPA funds, it highlights that those are considered multi-year budgets. And so if, for example, we allocated 300,000 to something and they only spent 150 by the end of the year, that other 150 is going to roll over automatically.
Sure, and we're not getting any more of it, so it's not.
Right.
Right, whatever we got is what we have, so.
And then we would fund the safer grant. Yep.
One of the special revenue funds I don't see on here anymore is franchise fees from the cable company. Is that something that's just kind of dwindled down, or was it just omitted, or?
So, no, it's in public access, so public
Okay.
access gets a portion of it and the levy gets a portion of it. And when I'm glad you asked that question, because when I was looking at our revenues and I saw permit and licensing revenue was down, I was like, why was that again? It was because of public access, because you remember every year we are now reducing our percentage by 1%. We get like $78,000 as a kind of a offset, but from the state, but our franchise revenues are going down.
Yeah, I know that's because there's less people
Right.
using cable television,
Yes.
so it's,
Yeah.
that's a dwindling fund. so.
Yes, so that was why those revenues I showed going down.
But that still funds public access. so,
Yes, it does, yep. And I can give you exactly how much they rely on, but, yeah. And when we look at room tax revenues, you can see that we have seen a pretty good turnaround from the pandemic. Again, and that's on the next slide, we get to retain 444,133 of the room tax, and that is based on the state law. We got to retain the greater of what we retained in 2010, or 30% of the revenue that we received in 2021, and our 2010 gets us the better calculation. So we're just flat, like we will never get more than $444,133. The rest is under control of the room tax commission. But I would say,
But
you know,
out of that portion, right, the finance committee is still awarding ongoing recipient grants still,
Yes,
right?
yep,
So
and that's
it
the
isn't
next-
all going to our purposes.
Yep, the next
Okay.
slide shows,
Continuing appropriations, that's what I meant to say.
yep, so, Visual Arts, Historical Society, Lee Yawkey, Main Street, Grand Theater, Wausau Concert Band, Wausau Events, all get an allocation of our share of room tax, as well as that transfer to the general fund, which all of them have basically been frozen. And then we also give a portion of it right to the 400 block fund. It's 400 block / River Life Fund, and it's to offset some of the, I guess, extraordinary maintenance efforts of the Parks Department, because those are high finished areas and that they require more maintenance. So it was a way to help us. At the time, Parks was adding a turf specialist, and we wanted to for sure be able to fund that additional position so that, particularly on the 400 block, we had green grass. Right, Jamie?
Well, and now between the soccer field, athletic park,
Yep.
and that, we have more grass than ever.
Yeah.
So,
But I would say too, I do see communities with their portion of room tax commission money doing things like destination, like if they had a park where they were gonna put something special in that they thought would actually generate tourism, was a tourism attraction, are doing things like that with their room tax commission component.
Well, and I would imagine if you would construct a facility that attracts tournaments, or,
Right.
you know, I mean, we just heard on the news last night that they're gonna build one out in Weston that will probably attract tournaments. If you had something like that, or if you had something where, you know, something that other areas don't have that people travel to. I mean, we had talked about maybe at some point JoJo's Jungle being something like that, because no one else has an adaptive playground. So that does make some sense. I mean,
So the capital budget, and this is for all governmental funds, not the enterprise funds, is $23,010,000. When we look at that, we do have some big projects that are grant-related. 3 of them out in the airport, $2 million for runway, $1.5 million for taxiway, and other concrete rehabilitation of $750. You can see that I think I have a mistake in my slide too. Our share is the 37.5. That's not the grant, sorry. But you can see that our grant amounts are significant. And we actually, you know, you have to commit to the grant, but we actually don't think that these grants will be up and the project's up and running until 2024. The same with the bus replacement. They'll order them in 2023, but we actually won't get them until 2024. So our share of the grant won't be actually due until 2024. When we look at the component of infrastructure, if you recall, that was about $9 million worth of infrastructure. Just a breakdown of what that is. DOT projects, street improvements is the largest category of 5.8. Pavement marking, storm sewer, which a lot of that goes for those, you know, in relation to those street projects. A sidewalk replacement program of $150,000. Asphalt overlay of $375,000. The 17th Avenue Water and Sewer, even though it's going to be paid for by a TID district, I still got it in here as a capital improvement. And then the concrete improvements of $710,000.
last Thursday, the SISM committee had a presentation on a stormwater utility. We started that discussion
Oh.
again. And we left the meeting knowing that we wanted to know more.
Okay.
And we were interested in studying the idea. Now, assuming something like that would ever take flight, the allocation that we show in here from levy goes away, right?
Yep.
Because the utility has its own revenue sources, it's collecting its own revenue. So, I mean, look at the savings right there, if that would take flight. I mean, level the playing field between our residential constituents and people today that pay nothing. So that, the committee all agreed that it wanted to know more, and we directed Eric to bring us some more information. So maybe bright things ahead, we'll see.
And then from the infrastructure, the big projects are Henrietta Street, North 10th Avenue, Grant Street, North 17th Avenue, and the Mall Street sidewalks and utilities. And again, that the mall projects are really, at this point, kind of a placeholder. We don't have the exact dollar amounts. When we look at funding sources for our capital projects, our basic CIP borrowing for 2023 would be 3.4 million. If you look, I have 2024, we would have to borrow the 1.5 million, which would be our share of the buses and the airport projects. The motor pool that we said we were going to borrow would be 2.2 million. TID debt for TID 8 and TID 12 would be 5.7 million. Our general property tax of 495,000. Other motor pool funds to fund the rest of those capital acquisitions, 1.9 million. And then, why doesn't that one have a thing? What is the rest of it? Special assessment income of 210. When we look at the central equipment fund, again, this is to replace ongoing things that are needing replacement. This year, the expenses would be about 650,000. You can see that we've basically carried on the allocations to almost all of the departments. The same, except for CCITC, as part of their capital request. They had requested IT security subscription of about $40-some thousand, $43,000, I think it was. So we have added that to this budget because it will be an ongoing expense. And obviously, security has become a big issue in the IT realm.
Well, and I think this has been huge for us because in the past, before we had a fund like this, I mean, it would be great if we could actually infuse it a little more over time, but, things like that you have to replace, like cameras and telephone systems and computers and stuff people just need. We're in the CIP plan every year competing with great big projects that, are like mass equipment replacements and, facilities work.
Right.
And so those things, I mean, when you went to shake out the scores, they scored pretty low. And so that stuff just wasn't getting done. So I think this really helped on keeping up with some of that. Doug?
Talking about security, is there anything in this piece that would be physical security of the building? Like access monitoring, other camera type things? I mean, I think we've talked about it, but I
Yeah,
don't know that it's.
it is not. I know that facilities has actually been working on putting something together for that, and I believe the intention is to submit an ARPA request for it. And that wouldn't be like ongoing maintenance, it would be some capital improvements to allow us to restrict access to City Hall, but for like the customer service area.
Right.
In that front
So
foyer.
it may cross over
Yeah.
slightly into IT, but
Yes.
maybe not as much. Okay.
So when we look at the impact of the capital budget to our general obligation debt, so just talking about our general obligation debt, at the end of 2021, we had 76,524,779 of general obligation debt. That was made up of bonds, which would have been issued that's over 10-year debt, notes, which are all amortized at 10 years or less, and then our, those loans that we have with the foundation. Did I skip a slide again?
I think we're back into the TID slides. that you
Oh,
did last
yeah.
night, So we have to skip over.
Sorry, I'll give you a chance to get caught
So we're
up.
flipping around, but you're fine. Here. Last night's presentation is in the middle,
Yeah.
so, yeah, we're good.
Okay.
We're caught up.
So so we've made our debt payments for 2022, because our debt payments are always set up that they're made on April 1st. So we made those in 2022. So we've made about 10 million, well, not about, 10,465,000 is our principal payments that we made this year. And so at October 1 of 2022, we had 66,059,779 of outstanding debt. We obviously just issued debt today of $69,795,000, so that brings that up to $69,854,779. So at the end of the year, that is where I would expect we would finish up the year. We have $10,040,000 of principal payments based on our amortization schedule, including the new amortization schedule that we just got today, that we're going to retire. And then these components that we've talked about as far as the capital plan. The CIP, the regular CIP would be the $3,491,000. That is a 10-year issue. TID 8, which is 17th Avenue, and some concrete improvements is $2,150,000. That would be a 10-year issue. The TID 12 projects in the cash flows of the TID districts that we looked at last night, I actually had that amortized over 8 years so that we could pay it off a little quicker. Again, because we've got that TID sharing from TID 7, it's allowing us to pay that debt off a little bit sooner. And then the motor pool of the 2.2, we would amortize over 5 years. So we would add those issues, and you would see that our outstanding debt at the end of 2023 would go up a little bit from what our outstanding debt from 2022 is. And then we would have committed to projects that were going to take place in 2024, but aren't taking place till 2024, and that would be the airport and the bus, and that would be another 1.6 million. But those would be issued as part of the 2024 issue.
But we still are continuing on our aggressive debt retirement
Yes.
plan. I mean, a number of years ago, these figures were way worse. I want to say
Right.
we were in the 90 million range. I mean, we had seen some pretty robust numbers there.
Right.
So,
And we are expecting to pay off the TID 6 early, and that was going to be about $1.2 to $1.3 million. So I didn't want to reflect that in here because we haven't actually formally made a decision to do that, but that would bring it down almost to, and it might actually bring it down to below where we would be this year then.
well, and I think it's important to make the distinction, even for the folks that watch us at home. It's oftentimes you'll see that people like to take debt and lump it all together as one thing. And so when you see an article come out that says, city owes $200 million, well, the city owes, at the end of next year, owes $72 million. So general obligation debt is the municipal debt for the services we provide and the projects that we do. Water and sewer utility not only borrows its own debt, but they carry, hold, and pay their own debt. They really are two separate things. And I think when we lead the public to believe that it's all Wausau's debt, well, is it? Because they're totally different fund sources and they're for different purposes. So, you know, I think it's important, and I'm glad that we do our workshops where they're available on public access for people to understand, because they don't always make sense of like what those figures mean. You know, if this figure was $200 million, we'd have something to worry about. But, you know, when we are looking at legacy projects for 50 years plus, that's just different. It's in a totally different context. So I'm glad that we have this laid out. And these documents and our budget draft are on the website, right,
Yep.
for people to
Well,
view?
Yeah, I'll get them on there tomorrow morning.
Okay,
I don't have them on there yet.
that's helpful. I think when people
Yeah.
can see where, you know, how we have, when we get through it and we have the draft that we finally send forward to the council once we're done with our workshop, it's good for people to be able to see like where we left off, where we are. So, thank you.
And when you look at our debt legal margin, so the state law says you take your equalized value and you multiply it by 10%. And that is the amount of debt a general obligation debt. That's by law, the amount of general obligation debt a community can have. And so looking at that, you can see that back in 2016, we were about 36%. 2017, 18, it climbed up to almost 58%. And now we've been seeing a decrease back down almost to our 2016 numbers. And I think that is indicative of when we did borrow that extra money because we knew TID 6 and TID 7 were getting ready to close. So we, added Thomas Street in, we added First Avenue in, we added a whole bunch of street improvements out by, in TID 7, so by Menards. out in that area, but we put them on super short amortization schedules. So we had big payments during that time until those districts closed. So that was the reason why our debt margin went up, but it's also the reason why it's coming down quickly.
Right, and we also, during that same time, had an awful lot of development growth. I mean, that was in there, during the time span where we were looking at like $200 million of new value. So we had an awful lot of projects that wanted to take flight at the same time as well. So, I mean, that was kind of brewing up the perfect storm, but it's good to see that we're getting close to where we were with our, on this chart at least, what our lowest point was.
And then, again, kind of looking, 10 million of principal payments in the debt service fund, interest of about 1.6. 7 million of that comes from the TID districts to help retire the debt because it's their share of the debt. So you can see they're picking up a big share of that. 4,198,000 would be our levy, which has been stable since 2002. This is our first year of increase, and again, I still did not need to increase it as much as I had predicted last year when we did the budget.
Okay.
And then, kind of our outstanding debt by purpose, so, you can see that of the outstanding debt, 40% of it is based on our capital projects, and the rest of it is the TID districts. Looking at future payoffs of debt, so if we look at our existing debt, and that would include the issue that we did today, that is in that blue, and if we would borrow between 4 million and 3.5 million each year in the future, and lay that on top of our existing debt, you can see that we still will have a relatively quick retirement of our outstanding debt. And then the next slide shows if we, or when we, build a public works facility. I'm using an estimate of $12 million of construction cost. That will be about a $840,000 annual payment. We don't really have capacity in the debt service fund to absorb that, so we would have to actually look at the levy. Again, one of those that when we're closing TID districts, it would be great if we could time it so that that TID district and all of that increment that's really, now free, because it's not paying for that TID district, could then be repurposed into retiring debt on the public safety, or the public works facility.
I think that's key, because a lot of the discussion we've had with that facility and just the back and forth that we've had, even trying to pick a site and look at sites for it, it seems that there is a volume of resistance to use land we already own. And so when we have to go out to the private sector and buy land at a, once someone knows the city wants to buy something, the price is a premium, right? So, that is going to ramp up the construction at the cost of that facility exponentially. So.
We're almost there. Enterprise funds. Metro Ride, like I said, $4.3 million of expenses. The levy is $899. He's got CARES funds of $495 in there. That is not something that will be around forever, but it is available for us this year. If we look at how we've utilized CARES funding on the next slide, the last couple of years, in 2021 was the first year that we applied CARES to the budget. It was $899,000. In 2022, we applied $735. In the 2023 budget of his CARES dollars is $495, and then the balance of that will be that $208. And so we would apply that, but you can see that it is allowing us to, I guess, go back onto the levy at a slower pace. I would say, just for kind of a informational thing, the other issue that it's not an issue, I don't know what word to call it, but kind of unique budgeting strategy that Greg uses when he prepares his operating budget is, when he submits his budget to the federal government, he wants, in the state government, he wants to make sure he's included all contingencies in there, because if he runs into a situation that inflates his costs, he can't go and ask for more money. So his budget has every contingency. If we funded our levy based on those contingencies, we would have to increase our levy significantly. So we don't necessarily fund his entire gap. So he's got his, federal budget. He's got the federal dollars that are based on that budget. He's got the state dollars that are based on that budget. He's got his ridership income. We're supposed to fund the rest of it. We usually don't fund all of that because of those contingencies that he's got baked into his budget. And this year, meaning the 2023 budget, he really felt the need to add a lot of contingencies because of fuel prices being what they are, because of parts prices, because of labor and, the salary study for non-reps. So he really built in a lot of contingencies because of the fact that we know our levy is going to increase. I funded the entire gap. But next year, he originally submitted a budget that was like, I need $1.3 million to levy. And I went, oh, that's a lot of money. How about you use more of your CARES dollars? And so that's what we did. And so again, next year, when we look at the budget, we'll look to see, well, what are those contingencies? Because he's very transparent about what those contingencies are. And we decide, okay, what's the chances are? And, most of the time when we levy for him, he still has more levy than he needs. And that has built up a reserve in his fund that he can use for capital if he needs it or for other things. So it has been, I think it's worked very successfully for us.
Well, and I think that's helpful that he has that little reserve as
Yep.
well, because in prior years, when
He
we've
likes
looked
it.
at capital for them, when they need simple things, like one year they needed a floor scrubber, and one year they needed parts racks, and things like the upgraded telephone systems and, doors security and things, little things like that, that they may not necessarily score high in the CIP process for, we maybe could look to that as well, so.
So this, you asked the question about the parking levy. Here's your answer. This is the parking fund and a history of our levy from 2015 to 2023. You can see that in 2015 and 2016, we were levying about $200,000 a year. That ended, and we actually had 2 years where we levied nothing, and then we've been on the slow train up. So, and really, if I could have actually increased that levy another $50,000, but I'm projecting that they're not going to spend their entire budget, and assuming that I didn't levy for the entire gap, because that would have been a lot to, take on in 1 year. And if we go back and look at our fee structure and see if there's some other efforts that, maybe we can find some other savings within that budget.
So how did we get to zero in 2017 and 2018? Was that the year that we lost the ramp attendants and the payroll for them, or what happened
Yes,
there?
I believe so.
Okay, because I know we had some HR savings there that year when
Yes.
we went to the new,
Yep.
okay. Go ahead, Doug.
I think I asked this back in maybe SISM. Some of this, quite a bit of that budget is for maintenance, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And with minimal use in the ramps at least, so that maintenance still accumulates even though there's not cars driving on it every day.
Absolutely. Yes, and you
So
have to keep the
deferment
lights
is.
on.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, and joint repair and the crack sealing and whatever, because their structural integrity has to be good. I think, do we find though that McClellan is nearing its end of life. Is that one getting to a point where it's nickel and diming us to death? I mean, it needed a lot over time in terms of
Yeah.
concrete work and that. And, at one time we were on track to look at replacement of that structure because it's probably getting close to the end right now. But, absent a plan for the block across the street, you know, we really haven't picked that ball up and gone across the finish line with anything, but that one is aging, and I think the older they get, the worse they are.
Right. I
So-
know that that is getting very close to the end of its useful life, like, you know, less than 5 years for sure. And I also know that it's gonna cost at least $1 million to take it down.
Right, and then the construction of whatever we put in its place, even if it's a half-block taller ramp or a half-block taller structure, it's still gonna be a robust expense for us, so.
Animal control, again, we've got about 238,000 of expenses. That includes the animal control officer, our contract with the Humane Society to take care of cats, I'm trying to think. Yeah.
Probably her equipment.
Yeah, her equipment. And then we do have revenue from the animals, the licensing, as well as revenue source from Weston for the animal control officer, because she provides services to them. And, you know, we set this up as an enterprise fund, but when we move to our new financial software, I'm gonna move it to a special revenue fund, because it's really not recovering all of its costs, and it's, you know, typically, enterprise fund is more profit-oriented, and this is, I think, more recover your costs-oriented and not
Right,
necessarily
at one point,
profit.
we had even looked at considering, I mean, considering the way this has worked, we had even at one point, somebody brought up the idea of making that a line item in the police budget, because that's where
Oh, yeah.
that person works. You know, I mean, that's just part of their staffing and their equipment and their management, it always has been. But you're right, it's an enterprise fund, it's, I don't think it's ever turned a profit. I mean, there's
Right.
always been,
So then we only have the water and sewer utility left, and Eric had another commitment tonight, and we thought maybe he could be here for those two, so if we could wait on those until next meeting and go through, those are just a few slides. And then as far as just kind of summarizing where, whoops, I went to the end. There, it's kind of summarizing what we have left to do. You know, we have still, as far as information, what our assessed valuation is. We handed out the supplemental requests tonight. And then we have revenue review, and like I said, I know for a fact, we've got the proposal for revenues for our EMS charges and parks and, inspections our inspection fees, because we're trying to, I guess, recover our inflationary costs of staffing of all of the reviews on, permit.
so now with the supplemental request, typically what we do is we have the departments present so
Yep.
that they can answer questions on these.
Yep,
So
next
we'd want to
Tuesday.
take these Tuesday.
Yep.
With our normal. Did we also want to try to schedule a session on the 24th after public health and safety?
I think that would be a good
That way
idea.
we're not getting to the end of that week. I mean, if everyone is available for Monday, the 24th, if we could maybe plan for 6:30, let me see, I can
Were
take
we
a.
looking at the 24th or the 27th?
Well, we were looking at both. If we had availability on the 24th, we could also reserve the 27th if we needed an extra session in there.
I think public health and safety is gonna be pretty long.
Oh, do ya?
We have a presentation from Nate, and then, yep, and then we have a presentation from the PD on their homeless situation. But other than that, it's just the basic license stuff. We can actually time restrict those two presentations. I mean, if they each take 15 minutes, I'd be surprised. So I think we'd be fine. If we plan a hard stop on public health and safety at 6:30, whatever we don't have done, we'll carry over, even if it's a presentation. So that's time that we can manage, so. Is everyone available Monday, the 24th, if we would do a 6:30 start? After PHNS ends? Okay, we're good with, let's try for that then.
Okay, Monday, 6:30?
Yep, and then we'll also have this item on Tuesday's agenda.
Yep.
Because we'll have more to work our way through. We'll try to keep the other finance stuff maybe light that night, so we don't run over into the council meeting
Yep.
if we can avoid it. And then if when we get to the end of Tuesday, if we feel like we also need the 27th,
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
you know, we could reserve that day for
Yeah.
one more if we feel like we need one more session.
Okay.
At 5:30?
On the 27th?
27th, let's go 5:15 if we can, if that works for everyone.
Okay.
And then 6:30 for Monday.
Yep, and so far I have a note, I'm gonna do the survey on parking, animal licensing, and then from yesterday's questions of like, what have we spent on solar and things like that, that was really related to ARPA, but I'll get that out tomorrow so that you guys have, that
So then,
information. in
can we
advance.
have the management teams do the supplemental presentations Monday
Sure.
rather than Tuesday?
Oh.
Because then we probably then
Yeah.
are gonna need to score them like overnight.
Okay.
Basically, because to get you something for Tuesday, right? So, I mean, we're gonna be on a tight scoring schedule. I guess, based on the information they've already provided, if you wanna try to kind of pencil in some scores, so that you have an idea of how you feel about it based on their written narrative, and then bring your questions Monday if you have questions for the department. You could always adjust your scores and then submit them Monday night, if that would work.
Okay.
Do you want water and sewer?
So you need these by Tuesday then, these supplemental requests?
Oh, yeah, we could do that, yeah.
Because we would hear from them Monday, answer our questions. We can try to tentatively score them now.
Yeah.
You know, based on what our reading is of the material they've given us. I'm sure we always have questions.
Yeah.
You know, and one of our questions always is, can something like this be done in more than 1 year?
Yeah.
Or in multi-phases? And so if you have questions like that, bring those along Monday for the staff, and we can always, I always start out writing the stuff in pencil, because then based on what I see and hear from them, I may change my scores, and then we'll submit our final scores like Monday night.
Okay.
And then for our Tuesday meeting, we'd probably, can you pull together those results then, like
Yep,
Tuesday morning?
for sure.
Okay. Then we can kind of keep going along here, and then maybe we won't need Thursday, but I think if we don't expedite that scoring, we're going to definitely need Thursday at the rate we are moving here, so. All right,
We're really cracking the whip on you guys.
we are,
Sorry.
you know, this is the time that the finance committee is grinding it out. October is a good time for finance, so. Okay, and then do we think by Tuesday that we'll have the other information that we're waiting on yet?
For the assessed valuation?
Yes, and will we have any of the open enrollment data for the HR stuff?
No, because
Not
I
yet.
think open enrollment doesn't start until next week, does it?
So we probably won't even know that until, we may have to just make an adjustment for the public hearing, right?
Right,
I mean,
that's, or even
our-
after the public
right,
hearing,
our-
for that matter.
Our draft will go forward
Yes.
with our best guess,
Yeah.
right? And then, okay,
Monday, they want to, if you could get
And
them.
we don't usually see too much wavering of change in
no, you
health
can
insurance
kind of
signups.
predict,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
so-
really these vacant positions that you don't know, you kind of feel like you have to
Right,
make them, you know, at least.
Right.
In the PD, we do a kind of a combo of married and single, because when you see these new police officers come in, a lot of them are single because they're young.
so you don't know which plan they'll take, so you just kind of mix it up.
Right,
Okay.
and because it's such a big base of people, but in these small departments like HR or assessment, you feel like you need to do a family plan.
Right.
So,
Right, okay. All right, so we'll have that then for next week. We'll issue an agenda for Monday night.
Yep.
Doug,
I guess
question?
just
Sure.
one last thing, I hate to throw a wet blanket on your party here. Just to piggyback on what Alder Rasmussen mentioned on the general obligation debt and
Yeah.
mixing and matching with the water and sewer, are we going to get into that total debt so we can have that information as far as the
Well,
commentary
I
made
think the
on?
presentation she asked Eric for Monday, right?
Yeah.
Is part of that.
yeah, and it's in your PowerPoint, he has the water and sewer debt in there.
There's a pie chart, we just didn't dive into it because
Yeah.
he's not here, so.
Okay,
we'll-
so we just add those pie chart pieces up, and that would
Yep,
be
and it should be, if you go to, in your debt packet, or in your total budget.
in the budget packet as well? Okay, I'll find them.
In the debt service section, I can tell you exactly what page it's on. If you turn to pages 112 and 113 maybe, you can see that the outstanding debt for sewer is 99,248,286 as of December 31st, or projected to be December 31st, and water is 50,186. And I do disclose, so you know, and this became like the big article last year, you know, that debt is issued on a draw basis. So we're drawing funds every time Myron sends, because Myron is doing both the water and the sewer projects. They were low bid on both of those. So they send a draw request each month to us. We send it to the Department of Administration and the DNR. They review them, they approve them, and then they send us the amount that's equal to that draw request. And then we pay Myron, and then our debt goes up. So these amounts assume 100% of what's available for us to borrow. It's
Okay.
not what we actually have today.
Right.
So our actual amount is less, but it's changing every month.
Right, and so last year, the big story that you were talking about
Right.
was this hidden debt
Yeah, but we
story.
didn't have
that
it
was-
yet.
We didn't have it yet, because nobody had built anything, or they were in the
True,
middle of
but
it.
I also don't want to be in a position where we're overselling.
Right.
That it doesn't mean anything because we
Well,
obviously
it's
want to
not-
consider it.
certainly not
So,
meaningless. It
right.
absolutely means something, but I think people have to put it in the appropriate context. And so, I don't know, I mean, it's got a different purpose, it's got a different fund source, and I think to roll it together and trot that out as a, you know, total number when the loan balance, it's like having a line of credit that you've not fully utilized on some of that stuff when it's on a draw.
But I'm certainly not trying to do that. I just,
Right,
I
no,
want to
but
make sure we're not.
But we have some who do.
Right.
And so I think it's important that, you know, we are not leading people to believe that things are 100 times worse than they actually are. And sometimes that's the perception that gets created when, you know, there's this like, you know, snippet type headline that comes out, and then you have to read to the fine print of all of it to really get the right context, if it's even in there. So I think at least when we have these discussions here, we have accurate information in the right context. We'll have Eric with us Monday night, so he can talk about, you know, where we're at with this, and, you know, and so we can know what we're approved to borrow and then what our actual loan balances are, I think is helpful. So, does anybody else have any questions on the stuff we've covered tonight? So we'll issue an agenda then for Monday, and then we'll continue down the path. I would say, you know, we'll go ahead and read over the supplements, because sometimes with the stuff, if they're simple projects, the written stuff is good enough. We don't always have a lot of questions. Maybe we could get most of the stuff scored without their, like, formal presentations, but if we have questions, we'll leave some wiggle room to adjust if we have to, so. All right.
Well,
With
thanks,
that,
everybody.
well, thank you. We'll take a motion to adjourn. Motion by Martin, second by Denny. Members in favor signify by saying aye.
Carol.
Aye. Opposed? No one ever is? We will see you on Monday. Thank you.